Beloved students of Acropolis Sophia, know full well that throughout this week, the Ascended Masters will continue to speak to the heart flames of the children of God far and wide across the face of the earth. Of course, most especially to those who are the children of God in Christianity, both those presently in embodiment, as well as those who have lived as Christians, any number of embodiments, and are currently living in a dream-like Christian heaven, unless they be awakened from that by the Ascended Masters and the angelic hosts, as some do experience that grace and find themselves drawn to this very place where they sit in amphitheaters round about and hear for themselves and observe with their spiritual sight the company of ascended masters, cosmic beings, that escort the one who is officiating at any one given session. This, although they will not bring back the conscious memory of it, the record of it is burned within their memory bodies because they are awake, and so they will hear. Similarly, the thought and feeling world of this whole planet are one, and the Brotherhood has seen fit to establish conduits of light throughout the earth, so that these messages are broadcast far and wide, and with angelic ministering hands and hearts guided directly to every precious heart flame that is a candidate for hearing the message and awakening to the truth of their own beloved mighty I Am presence. So understand, beloved ones, that while the Ascended Masters will certainly be championing your path, they will be continuing to address the children of the light far and wide across the face of the earth. In that regard, what comes to mind is a statement that is well known in Christianity, Christian churches, and that is the phrase, preaching to the choir. The choir in an ordinary church are the ones usually closest to the minister or directly opposite, depending on how the church is built. They are the most steadfast ones. They come midweek and practice. And sometimes, if the pews aren't so full, the minister by default ends up addressing the ones who are there. And if he has a fire and brimstone message, it is intended for the ones who are absent, but directed to those who are present. Hence the phrase, preaching to the choir, which is a very ironic situation. So do bear in mind, don't have the situation of the disciples around the Lord's table at the Last Supper asking, is it me, is it me, is it me? Is Jesus talking about me? When those things are, for the most part, aimed over your heads, far and wide across the face of the earth, spoken forthrightly into the hearts and feelings and minds of those who are asleep, even while they are going about their daily lives, they are asleep, spiritually speaking. And the intent is to, as Jesus has taught, to ignite their hearts and to awaken them from that sleep, engendering the courage to endure the change. Change was a keynote yesterday, and we'd like, as we launch into this week, to elaborate a little bit more on that theme as it relates to all of you and as it relates to the mankind of earth. In this case, it has to do with the correct understanding of the interaction between God, God's will, even God acting through the ascended masters, even God acting through your own mighty I Am presence, and your life, you individually, on your path, and also all of the mankind of earth. There is a principle at work in this world. The ascended masters have given it a proper name. It is called the law of octaves. It's easier to tell you how the law behaves than it is to give you the full explanation behind it. But it is accurate to the nth degree and is uncanny in how precise, working in very ponderous and weighty affairs that are actions or decisions that are made willfully, but working equally as accurately on things that are experienced or decided below the level of conscious awareness. Essentially, the law of octaves teaches that the mighty I Am presence sends forth its very own heart flame as the Godhead charioteer out from the heart of God that we have come to call the great central sun, out from the uppermost figure in the body, that is the body worn by the mighty I Am presence, body referred to as the electronic body. This presence sends forth its own heart flame into 5 successively more dense worlds and realms. 2 of those would be bona fide realms of God's heavenly world. The first is known as the Nirvanic world in the East. There probably is not a name for it in the West. The second is the world known as the Buddhic world. There again, there is no scientific counterpart in Christianity, no real subtle shading or nuance of definition, because metaphysics has been looked upon as a wrong science in the Christian faith. So both of those would be what you would call the kingdom of heaven. So the I Am presence, your I Am presence, long ago sent forth the expression of its heart into the nirvanic world and has built up those levels of self-expression that are the concentric rings of fire that you see portrayed surrounding the mighty I Am presence, the body of the electronic body. Similarly, the heart of the I Am presence is sent forth into the Buddhic world, which is the realm of the cosmic Christ. And there again, the process is repeated. The heart flame then eventually was sent forth into the outer world, the world of mind, the world of memory, of emotion, and of the mineral and plant life that we call the physical world. In each of these successively, the threefold flame of the I Am presence builds up for itself vehicles of expression. We'll have a great deal more to teach about the nature of this threefold flame as the divine spark on the morrow, and how that understanding of the heart of man as something divine and supremely good is not what is reflected in the Old and New Testaments. And so that too is a very great advancement in Christianity. The principle of the law of octaves is that wherever that threefold flame builds up vehicles for itself, the ideal is for the heart flame to take its control over the bodies. The bodies, for a whole host of reasons, especially now, since we are so far removed in time from the fall of mankind, the bodies have their own willful, rebellious nature that they wish to assert over the heart flame. And essentially, the higher levels of the Godhead are not able to interfere with how the bodies choose to abuse the heart flame. And so if those bodies rebel, then so long as that rebellion is alive and fueled by the forces of life, the higher levels will not come down and force something else upon those bodies. This is contrary to how Christianity understands the will of God. Christians have been looking forward to an irrevocable timetable for the second coming. In their minds, it is known and destined and measured out exactly when this will occur. And the implication is that that second coming of the Christ and the lowering of the New Jerusalem and the final battle of Armageddon as the judgment where evil is put down, all of this will be superimposed by the presence of God with or without the conscious cooperation and invitation of embodied mankind. Even in the case of individual life streams, there is this implied, irrevocable power of the presence of God to override free will and to supersede what is going to happen. Kismet, what will be, will be. It was preordained. I'm sure you've heard that many, many times. In fact, because of the true nature of men and women as formative sons and daughters of God, really and truly, what God would do in answer to your prayers or your decrees, God is obliged to do through the vehicles of your very own consciousness. And if those vessels of thought and feeling and even the physical body, if those are as the wise virgins with their oil in reserve and their wicks of their lamps trimmed, if they are alert and ready when the bridegroom would come in, all is well. But if the bodies have become foolish, like the foolish virgins, who have dissipated all of that sacred fire, which is the oil that fuels and burns as the light of life, then the bridegroom is obliged to pass by. And they are not able to have that entering in of the presence that is what God would want to have happen. This is an uncanny thing, that what God would do for you, God must ultimately do through you. Oh yes, there have been numberless examples of where, for the mercy of the law, there have been miracles performed. But those miracles have not advanced the attainment of the recipient one iota. They have merely bought time for the person to regain their equilibrium and to have a renewed opportunity to pick themselves up and to strive once again. So miracles, in that regard, performed vicariously, are no more efficacious than the vicarious performed atonement by some other part of life. What this means is that on the world scene, out in the whole of this world, as well as within our own activity, the temple of the presence, as well as in your individual path with your beloved mighty I Am presence, the brotherhood of light, all of the levels of the Godhead, always stand ready. And they are doing everything that is possible to be done within the confinements of the impersonal cosmic law. They're doing everything possible to help. But if that help, and I'm speaking now as well on a universal level as well as on an individual level, if that help is taken for granted, if the fruit of that help is taken for granted without any attempt to learn and to do these things for one's self, then eventually the time comes when the dispensation of that help, which afforded the grace to go forth, the time comes when it is no longer the wisdom or the mercy of God to prolong the abuse, to prolong the neglect, to postpone the impersonal weight of returning karma, which the hand of God has heretofore stayed and held back in abeyance. This does not mean, nor should anyone imply, that the return of karma is something done by God for punishment, that it is done by God as a way of exacting retribution. It is really and truly not something that is caused by God. It is caused by human beings. They are the ones who have, in the millions and billions, as we have that many life streams in embodiment now and in past cycles, mankind en masse have misqualified life. They have sent it out. It's gone out to the edge of the aura of our world, into the mind plane, into the emotional plane, into the etheric planes, and then there it has accumulated and accumulated and accumulated as an overburden of discord. And wherever possible, the worst tragedies of that are stayed by the hand of God's love and mercy. So long as there is an effort being made by mankind, a striving on their own. Take, for example, the times that Jesus multiplied the loaves and the fishes. What happened on those occasions? A few hours later, people got hungry again. And they looked around for their meal ticket and hunted him down. Sometimes he had to go out on a little skiff, a little boat out into the choppy Sea of Galilee just to escape those who were coming for the next meal, or those who were coming because he was rumored to have the ability to heal their maladies. And while in one sense, those things are understandable, if everyone is going to have a human tendency, as long as things are being done on their behalf, to lounge around, to engage in recreation, to engage in whatever form of, just as Jiminy Cricket said, the world owes me a living. Having that attitude that everything should be furnished to them carte blanche. Unfortunately, that does transpire. Now, how does this relate to all of you? It relates in the opportunity that all of you have with your decrees above all else. One of the best ways of balancing lifetimes worth of karma is with your decrees. It is a form of world service when you give your world action decrees and your violet flame vigils. You may not understand this, but the truth is that you can make an invocation or a decree on behalf of the entire world. And because of who and what your mighty I am presence is, as well as the others ascended who hear that decree, your presence can send forth as much power to bless everyone in the world as effortlessly as your presence sends forth the power to transmute your own personal daily allotment of karma. That is absolutely the case. So many times we, at the end of our decrees, will ask that it be expanded to include all of the mankind of earth. So when you give those calls, you are blessing the whole world. When you give those calls in groups such as this, where we have those assembled here at Moria House and those participating from afar, there is also the multiplication of the number of heart flames who are decreeing jointly. Then there are certain additional dispensations from the Lords of Karma, whereby your decrees are taken up by the Ascended Masters. The same way that the 2 fishes and the 3 loaves, or whatever it was that the little boy had, those were taken up by Jesus and multiplied and multiplied and multiplied until those few initial loaves and fishes were expanded to feed 5,000. So too, when you make your calls in the proper manner with the correct intent, they are taken up and they are multiplied by the Ascended Masters, by them adding their Ascended Master momentum to your calls. And there again, that light is lavished all around the world. In this way, though you might not recognize it, this certainly is one of only a handful of ways in which you could possibly balance as much karma as you can balance in this way. Think of a careless camper in a forest that is dry as tinder, who mindlessly forgets to douse the last living coal of their fireplace, or who is driving by a forest road and mindlessly tosses out either a lit match or a lit cigarette, and only that little one action is fanned into a conflagration that may involve thousands or tens of thousands of acres. It may destroy homes and businesses. God forbid it should cost anyone their lives. All of that from a tiny little spark that was done carelessly. And there is a chain reaction of karmic balancing that accrues from such an action. Fortunately, God looks at motive and intent as well as ignorance and blindness, and there are programs in place with the Brotherhood of Light to mitigate what would otherwise be the absolute impersonal eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth repercussions of those kinds of events. I cite that example mostly so that you can understand what we're really going to be talking about here this evening shortly, and that is the fire, the two-edged sword of sacred fire that can issue from your heart and mind through the spoken word of your decrees, going out and kindling a conflagration of the sacred fire far and wide across the face of the earth. This is a tremendous service, and really and truly, this is not said in order to flatter anyone's egos. If anything, it is said so that you might undertake one of the Christ virtues of responsibility and authority, two of the Christ virtues. Because those who are clad in the garments of their own God identity and understand that the threefold flame of their heart is a veritable scepter of divine authority through which they are expected and vested to issue commands in the name of their I Am Presence to all of life to respond, and by that to be part of the deliverance to the planetary body. Before we do that, let's go back and point out where the world is here in the 21st century. The world has been more or less, at least the Western world for the most part, has been at peace for many decades. Yes, there have been rumors of wars. Yes, there have been episodes. But there has been a great deal of discretion for mankind in the West to be free, to choose what they wish to say, choose what they wish to spend their free time and their discretionary income on, what kind of hobbies do they entertain, what kind of entertainments do they indulge in, what are they doing with their lives. And here is the crux of the matter, which puts in context the service that you are able to render. We are going to hear tonight from one of the senior disciples of beloved Saint Germain, who at a certain time was shown the object lessons of many of the efforts of the Brotherhood of Light to bring forth what has been called a golden age in the earth. Maria spoke about Camelot. That was supposed to have been a golden age ideal society. When Moses led the Israelites out of bondage, that was to have been the beginning of a golden age society. When King David established the unified nation of Israel, that was to have been a golden age. The idea of the New Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven, that was to have been a golden age. These are a few of the abortive attempts toward that are accepted in recorded history. But there are others further back in the dasa pre-history, going back to civilizations and continents that have gone the way of the world, gone away, but had reached even a higher approach to such golden age ideals. They always were started in great hope and anticipation, and they had a life cycle to them. In their infancy, they were robust and still free of the burden of karma. They were youthful and lusty in a positive way, full of the joys of life. In their early ascendancy, they were very busy building up those golden ages. They were engaged in the striving to bring those golden ages to pass. And so they didn't have a lot of excess of any sort to misuse. And so their consciousness was pretty well focused. And by default, they just didn't get themselves into a lot of trouble. The real problem becomes when the war is won and it's time to wage peace. In many regards, for human beings, success and peace and abundance are greater stumbling blocks. Because when all the exterior pressure is lifted off, then what you're left with is the heart flame and the voices of the bodies arm wrestling with each other for which part of life is going to win out and hold its superiority. And as we said before, uncannily, even though there is a mighty I Am presence, even though there are these ascended masters, even though there is the God of very gods, they are not going to come down and bash anyone over the head or grab them by the hair and say to them, you are going to be happy whether you want to or not. You are going to be good whether you know that it's good for you or not. That kind of compulsion is neither lawful nor fruitful because it doesn't elicit the flame from within the heart. The ascendancy of such ages occurs because behind the scenes there is a great focus of ascended master light. That is a pressure and a momentum of the light that is part of a preordained program at inner levels. In order for that program to work, volunteers from the disciples of the ascended masters have to incarnate and they have to anchor the flame. Good example is Moses. Moses had to come into embodiment. He had to answer the call to climb up the mountain. He had to take his sandals off when he came to the burning bush. And all of the things that were done thereafter, if you'll notice, when the miracles were performed, Moses and or Aaron were right there on the scene. And their cooperation, what God would do for them, God had to do through them. Through the wielding of the rod of Aaron, through the wielding of the staff of Moses. Yes, there was a dispensation, but it had to be engaged in willingly and in full awakeness and cooperation by unascended mankind. So there is always a sponsorship, such as the glorious divine ideal of the United States of America, for example, the way in which it was founded, sponsored by none other than beloved Saint Germain and his embodied senior disciple, beloved Godfrey, who was an embodiment at that time as George Washington, and others of that era, the founding fathers who were working under the overshadowing of Saint Germain, the goddess of liberty, and others of the ascended masters. All of this to set the framework in which freedom of thought, enlightened thought, and freedom of expression, freedom from being put down into some lockstep form of class consciousness and so forth, all of that was established for the purpose of bringing forth, first here and then everywhere across the world, a dawning golden age of beloved Saint Germain. And so there was an immense amount of light. The light of 10,000 suns from the heart of God came forth to establish our freedom, to establish our principles, to provide peace at home, order at home, and regardless of what complaints anyone might make, more of the abundant life here than most places for most people far and wide across the face of the earth. Now, the question is, when everything starts out so idyllically, when everything has this grand start with it, how is it that such things come up to the brink of really punching through and getting to the level of perfection, and then so very many times right at the brink of victory, defeat comes to pass? How and why does that take place? And here is the explanation that Saint Germain gave. When a group of mankind are fortunate enough to come under the instruction and radiation of great masters of light, then that group is given the opportunity to see the plan of life for mankind, to see the perfection that they are intended to bring forth, and to live in, and here's the operative part, by their own conscious effort. By their own conscious effort. Unfortunately, as it has been true so very many times down through the ages, the rank and file of mankind will not make the exertions to either understand the mysteries of life, and they let themselves drop into a state of lethargy and do not exert the required effort, the necessary effort to accomplish the things that have been done by them by the power of God within each individual. They don't make that exertion. Instead, they continue to lean on the ascended master or masters who have been furnishing them with that radiation. Remember the statement we shared with you of Jesus? It is expedient that I go from you, that another may come unto you. Because there is that tendency, even amongst the inner circle of those apostles, to lean upon Jesus for the light that he furnished from himself. And so by him sending them forth, by him taking his ascension, it meant that they would have to give expression to the heart flame of their own God presence and make that effort. They lean on the one or ones furnishing the radiation. The sustaining power of the dispensation that built up the Golden Age in the first place is withdrawn if, and only if, either one individual or a group of individuals ceases to make their own self-conscious efforts to understand and to work willingly in cooperation with life. These rarely actually confront the realization that most of their blessings are the result of the sustaining power of the Ascended One giving the radiation. If a certain group of life streams have been taught this way of mastery, and they've been taught what the goal is for themselves, and reminded of this divine birthright, and they refuse to engage in striving themselves, then is when the radiation of the ascended masters is withdrawn, and such persons are compelled to confront the fact that the sustaining and accomplishing power that they had been reaping the rewards of was not due to their own effort. Ultimately, you can only receive, by way of attainment, that which you make the effort for. There is no ultimate failure for anyone who continues to make self-conscious effort to express dominion. Failure only comes if the person quits, if the self-conscious effort ceases. We have seen that here in this activity, where individuals have thought that the light that they were experiencing was only from their own mighty I Am presence. And they kind of took it for granted, the way people across the world constantly take for granted the gift of youth, the gift of life, the gift of freedom. They take it for granted and feel like it's theirs to do with as they want. But what is really happening is that there is the sponsorship of the Brotherhood, and there is the regularity of the releases from the Ascended Masters, and that has been the plus factor that has enriched their lives and blessed them on their path. And if it is taken for granted for too long, and what are some of the ways of taking it for granted? If you are raised into purity, if you are raised into the absolute pristine Ascended Master vibration, as you are by the Ascended Masters, that is intended to stay in your aura, preserved in the vibration in which you receive it. And it's supposed to work on your inner bodies. And if individuals receive that light and go out from the services and forget, as soon as they leave the property, they forget everything that's been going on and take those charged vehicles, sit themselves down in the wrong atmosphere where the wrong things are taking place in their presence, if they sit themselves down in the wrong kind of imagery on a movie screen, for example, the wrong kind of dialogue, that takes all of that pure light of the Ascended Masters and the charge that's been transferred to their own four lower bodies. The charge that's been transferred to their own four lower bodies is subject to the law of octaves and their own qualification, not the Ascended Master light, which will return to the Ascended Master, but their own acceleration will quickly be decelerated. And when that happens, time after time after time, as if it was the norm, eventually those same people coming into the same sanctuary will wonder what all the fuss was about. And they'll say to themselves, well, this has kind of run its course for me. I don't feel the same thing anymore. It's because of those types of patterns, the light has to be mercifully withdrawn until there is a gratitude for it and a striving for it. Now, this is not true just of individual life streams on the path, nor is it just true of Ascended Master activities. It is also true of nations, of civilizations, of religions, all of which have had their sponsorship at various times and a divine intent for those and what was supposed to go on. And unfortunately, because of the stress laid upon the exclusivity of Jesus as the only divine member of the Trinity, the only Son of God, and the role that presumably only Jesus could play in the life of anyone's life, all that is left for the average Christian is to allow Jesus to do what only God can do. And so there is, in a sense, not only the ignorance and the neglect of the individual God identity of the life stream, but there is that leaning on the one that Saint Germain just described, where it is put onto Jesus' shoulders the job for furnishing all of the radiation, the job for really doing all of the inner work, and producing it all on his own. And so unless that whole mindset is somehow transcended, it can't go on like that forever, because there is a stultification of progress to the life stream. They are in a deep groove that repeats lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, the same patterns of that kind of orientation and that kind of reflection. Tonight we're going to talk about one of the ways in which that, which I know is well-meaning, and it's what people feel is the role that they are supposed to play, one of the areas where this really is very evident is when it comes to the prayer life of the Christian world. And what is exactly involved in prayer? Prayer, as Christians understand it, remembering now that they themselves are the passive recipients of the benefits of prayer. Prayer is a process of supplication. It is a case of where the life stream will, in spirit at least, go through stages, maybe of being very humble before God, prostrating oneself before God, praising how great God is in comparison to oneself, asking God to forgive for sin, asking for help in certain areas, and hoping that God will bless them, or Jesus will bless them with the answer to that prayer. In other ways, it is described as a conversation, which is fine as far as that goes, a two-way conversation between God and the individual, where the will of God will be shown to the heart of the individual. Sometimes it is a form of praise, which is fine as well, where you are singing a song of praise to God. All of those things in that sense are wonderful as far as they go, and they are certainly better than nothing at all. But here is how one of the ascended masters characterized prayer. There have been platitudes by the millions written and preached about divine love as the law of life, but who knows how to generate the actual feeling of divine love, and to generate it consciously and at will, and to a limitless degree, and to put that charge of love within one's own world in the place of irritation or hate, etc., as a wave of actual force and spiritual substance within one's own feeling body. Such a thing must be done if human beings are ever to cease their suffering and express perfection. If prayers, which are generally a series of, quote, I once, or, O Lord, please give us, were the way to freedom from limitation, the prayers that have been uttered throughout this world would have perfected a dozen humanities. I do not say that prayer has not brought good, but prayer really is a quieting of the mind, a stilling of the feeling, so that the personality might move on to feeling the outpouring of their own mighty I Am presence. It should be the beginning of a greater process, a priming of the pump by an outpouring of love and gratitude to the presence for the limitless opportunities and the good contained within life. Of course, if human beings are as they have been, it has been drilled into their minds by how they were created in Genesis and so forth, if they have bought into the idea that they are separate and apart forever from God, how can they hope for anything else, or how could they ever imagine anything more? This is where there is a true quantum leap of advancement beyond what Christianity knew. It builds squarely on the foundation of the divine identity of God individualized as the mighty I Am presence, passed along to the outer self, so that the outer self is vested in the robes of the divine self. You see this ideal portrayed in the picture of the mighty I Am presence behind us. If you will, you might consider that you yourself are represented in the young lowest figure, whereas the mind of Christ, the mind that was in Christ Jesus that can be in you, the Christ presence or the Christ mind, is that perfect, mature son or daughter of God that is overshadowing the outer self. That is the robe that the Father put on the prodigal son upon the prodigal's return. The heart flame is the scepter of authority that the Father vested this son with. So there is something more than mere petitioning in the interaction between the outer, vested with the Christ presence, and the mighty I Am presence. This is where you must have transferred to you the elements of the consciousness that is in your own mighty I Am presence. A few things about the upper figure in the chart or the portrait, the I Am presence. First of all, this presence is aware. It is conscious. It is not asleep. It is not blind. And it is not mechanical, because it is likewise individual and has its own self-generated will and thought, divine intent, and so forth. Furthermore, this God presence has and shares the consciousness of the God of very gods. The mighty I Am presence is not really a duality or separate from the God of very gods. And so your mighty I Am presence is a very authoritative figure in one sense, truly a royal personage that has that demeanor and consciousness, that presence is the authority over all of creation and all of perfection. And when you give the advancement in Christianity, which goes under a number of names, such as decrees, when you give those decrees, they are not servile, self-deprecating cries for help. They're not a plea or a whimpering or any kind of a begging bowl type consciousness where you're saying to God, oh, please have mercy on me. Please, pretty please, will you just this once do this thing for me? That is not the ideal. That is the true transcendent advancement that is needed in this world. The way the world has gotten the way it is because there are tidal waves of misqualified thought and feeling that are worldwide in scope at inner levels. these have stored up volumes of energy that are impossible to imagine. But if you could imagine yourself ever caught in a mass riot where thousands, tens of thousands of people are in a mania, and how uncontrollable that mob mentality is, that would give you some idea of the amount of energy that is pressing in upon the world and seeking to rupture through into one form of disruption or cataclysm or another. And in order for those types of momentums to be rolled back and arrested, there must be a dynamic, commanding authority in the world that gives the command. The wind and the waves were stilled because there was a Christ there to issue the command, "Peace, be still." The Red Sea parted because there was a Moses there to raise his rod on high. The examples could go on and on. So in this era, the technology of prayer has been advanced to heights not imagined by Christianity. The power of the spoken word goes forth here in a number of very important ways. It was given as a science first to beloved Godfrey by beloved Saint Germain. We should not be surprised that this life stream would bring forth the acme of this science because of the examples that he has set down through the ages. This life stream has, amongst his many sterling qualities, the most admirable fearlessness and a boldness that is prompted by the presence. This life stream was embodied long ago as Achilles, who purportedly had an invulnerability except in one place behind his heel. He was fearless and a force to be reckoned with in that life, so much so that he actually did battle with rivers. He was embodied again as a recognized historical figure, Alexander the Great, who believed himself to have been Achilles. And as he traveled around the world, he slept with a copy of Homer's Iliad under his pillow and dreamed of the very heroic achievements which he would achieve. The same life stream was Richard I, who similarly had the ability of a certain invulnerability as well as an absolute fearlessness. The same life stream was Henry V. The same process all over again. The same life stream was Washington, who had that fearlessness and even the same invulnerabilities on the field of battle. All through the French and Indian Wars, the Wars of the Revolution, and so forth, he was never touched. And I have to add one to this because it really tells the story better than just about any of the others. He was Samson in the Old Testament. And if you recall, the Spirit of the Lord would descend upon Samson. And I guess there's one famous time when he took the jawbone of a donkey and just used it as his weapon and banished and dispelled a host of enemies of ancient Israel. The important thing is that he had that power come upon him, and it was the descent of the light of his own mighty I Am presence. This same life stream was also the archetype knight who had a historical identity that is so far back in history that the actual historical identity is somewhat shrouded in myth, but there was this life stream, and because of the great momentum of light, the whole tradition of St. George came forth. And this saint, who is one of the most prominent saints of many of the world's Christian denominations, not just Western Catholicism, but Eastern Orthodox and others, the tradition is that he is the patron of those who have to give their lives on the field of battle. He is renowned especially for the slaying of the misuse of the solar force, symbolized in the fire-breathing dragon, which is the case in which that sacred fire has been driven down into the earthy, which causes weakness. When that is slain, as St. George slayed the dragon, that is when that same energy is raised up. And when it is raised up, it becomes power. It becomes the power of the sacred fire that goes forth as the power through the throat, as the spoken word, goes forth as power in the feelings, as the feeling of the charge of light in the feelings, as peace, as harmony, as safety, as fearlessness, white fire of fearlessness with the emerald tinge upon it, all of the qualities in that emotional body raised up as the sharply delineated, etched, fiery forms of light issued forth in the mind. So that we have now what was called by Hilarion in his last public embodiment as Iamblichus, the glorious ritual of theurgy. Theurgy is a Greek word that simply means God work. And it is a process of invocation. Invocation is one type of this God work. It is a process of decree. It is a process of fiat, a process of affirmation, and another one that isn't as well known, but is truly born of the mighty I Am presence. It is a process of what was known in Latin as the numen, which is the will of the mighty presence, signifying its commanding consciousness. It was memorialized first, most famously by Homer, in the subtle but omnipotent nod that Zeus would deliver on certain occasions, which would cause all of the rest of the Olympians and all the lesser deities of all sorts, including the elemental spirits, to fly in obedience to the fulfillment of that will. And that is perhaps where we should begin with the idea of decree, is that nod of Zeus as the archetype of the mighty I Am presence, who has the authority. There is a place early on when beloved Saint Germain stresses most emphatically that the consciousness of the Godhead at its highest level is one God. And that one consciousness absolutely is the presence of God that issued forth the commands for the planes and the worlds to unroll. And so this consciousness knows supremely that it is the authority that has brought forth creation, that has brought it forth. And every individual mighty I Am presence shares in that consciousness. And now it is time for the Christian world to accept their mighty I Am presence and accept the scepter of authority of their own heart flame, that through that heart their voice might speak and through that heart they might crystallize their will in ratification of the will of their presence, that the light shall issue forth. So the nod is that supreme authority of the God that has created everything and knows that all is one. And in the undivided oneness of the presence, the other parts of the selfhood of the Godhead must obey. The next expression of this is in invocation. Invocation is not a mere conversation with God. Invocation is when the embodied son or daughter of God acts in the office of priest or priestess before the altar of the Most High, and in the office of the individualization of their mighty I Am presence, addresses the allness of the Godhead. Tomorrow we will dwell a little bit more on that advancement, about how the heart flame of your selfhood is in the place of speaking to the God of very gods. Tonight, you can think of it like this. If you have the highest power in the world, let's say that somewhere there's an emperor, and the emperor has an empire, and there are 15 kings or kingdoms under the emperor. And there are all these courts and all this far-flung frontiers of his empire, and there's a whole courtly system like a Versailles or something with all of the ministers and all of the trappings of all of that power. But that emperor also has a marriage and a child that is born into that family. If that is a truly loving father or empress as a mother, are they going to deny their child when their little one wants to climb up onto their lap and beg or ask for something? Or, in other words, is that child going to have an intimate access? And are all of the formalities going to be set aside in order for that intimacy of access? And what you need to learn is that your heart flame in your physical body, in your emotional body, in your mind, your heart flame is such a child of the Godhead, the God of very gods. And there can be that intimacy of communion between the two that is direct and extremely personal. That being the case, your heart flame and your mighty presence as well, and your Christ presence, you are able to send your call, your invocation. You're able to invoke this God of very gods as if you were in some huge amphitheater with a dome over it, and everything inside was absolutely still and quiet. So much so that your voice reverberated to the furthest parts of that amphitheater. So too, your voice is heard in the allness of the Godhead. And the allness of the Godhead, the presence is invoked by your call. It is as if the presence of the Godhead is a tree of life, and there are all manner of ripened fruits upon that tree. And when you make your call, it gives just enough of an impulse so that all of that is dumped out in answer to your call. Your call goes out instantaneously, and God answers instantaneously. That is not karma, and it is not a mechanistic process, because the God of very God hears, loves, cares, and answers. And that is the power of invocation. And the more that you are able to imbue your consciousness with the magnitude of what is acting, remember, it happens through you. So the more your faith mounts up, the richer your imagination becomes of the divine, the more that will come to the fore. So that would be invocation. Next, let us take, for the moment, affirmation. Affirmations are really I am, followed by a positive quality of something that you know is both in your mighty I am presence already, and something that you know has already been actualized in the heart and the mind of God. Beyond the realm of heaven, there is a more eternal realm. That is the realm of God's being, God's life, the allness of God's being, the allness of God's life, and the allness of God's mind. And there are actualized every good and perfect thing that can come forth. And affirmation is when you understand that in using the name of God, I am, that whatever is there within your mighty I am presence and whatever is there within the allness of God, you too are. And when you affirm that and you bring your mind, which may otherwise be doubtful or suspicious or blind and ignorant or darkened, you bring your mind into conformity with what you are recognizing in the presence of God. You likewise have to bring your feelings along. If you are depressed, if you are full of fear or anxiety, stress, worry, jealousy, the list goes on and on. If your feelings are stained with those discolorations, you cannot pass through them these perfect pastels of the ideals of the presence of God. So when you give an I am affirmation, you are saying in the seat of your threefold flame to your presence and to the heart of God universal, I am that which you are, and you know that on the instant that comes forth from your world. The next we would call a fiat. A fiat is typically a very short command and demand that is given to life. A fiat traditionally is something that was given by a potentate, a king or a queen, or an emperor or an empress. And it was a unilateral, actual command that was given to the populace of a nation and so forth. In this case, and this is where, again, unless you've done the preparatory work of shifting over from feeling yourself to be a human being merely, and now are once again awakened to the truth of your God self, you understand that the heart of your I am presence has asserted itself in your physical body, your mind, and your emotions, and that it is that mighty I am presence that is really the authority for the fiat, and it is the light of the consciousness of your God presence and your Christ presence so very close at hand, mediating this whole process, so that you are giving this fiat not only back to yourself, to your I am presence, but you are again giving it to the allness of God. Because the purpose of individualizations of God, sons and daughters of God, is to command the allness of God. One of the rituals that occurs from time to time during the addresses of the Ascended Masters is that they will issue fiats to life. You will notice, or maybe you have noticed, and maybe you have not noticed, but the Ascended Masters often preface what they are about to deliver as a fiat by pointing out that prior to the address, there has been agreement by the spiritual governing body known as the Lords of Karma that there is a covenanted dispensation that this fiat may be delivered. There are consequences to the dispensations. There are consequences to the use of light. And no ascended being acts unilaterally. So if a cosmic being is going to issue a fiat, it is by prearranged conferment and agreement of bodies of ascended masters and councils of ascended masters that, yes, this fiat will go forth. And so only then will the ascended master give that fiat which sends forth certain fohat into life, and that fiat then brings an absolute necessary result back to the earth. These fiats are cups of light of the ascended master consciousness, and any number of them have been by design intended for the unascended disciples to echo those fiats, standing at their altar, singly or collectively as we do, to give those fiats in the spirit in which the ascended or cosmic being initially gave them. They are a quick, firm command to life. They go out and life obeys. Trust me when I tell you that there is more science to this process than the world can be entrusted with. There are laws of engrams. There are laws of rhythms. There are laws of many things that go into these things. And only the end result, typically as the form of the decree, is permitted to be issued forth. But when they go forth, it's like shaking the tree of life, and results are sure to follow. Fiats continue to act, decrees continue to act, and that's very much a blessing to life. One of the other forms in which these come are as dynamic decrees. Decrees many times will have certain rhythms. They will have a certain poetic core to their structure, rhyming in some cases. They are intended to be a mnemonic that allows for you to be a musician, only instead of playing on a flute or a piano or some brass instrument, you are using the instrument of the blue fire of the power of the spoken word through the blue chakra of the expression of your heart flame. And you are issuing forth ribbons of sound, timpanis of sound, trumpet shapes of sound. These are going forth. The word forms are going forth, and they are reverberating through the etheric double portion of the earth body. You are making sound waves move, and you are making etheric substance move and form shapes that are intended to go forth. You are doing that all within the physical body. Simultaneously with that, just like piano players have two hands, well, your heart flame has threefold flames that's almost like playing three hands or four hands, because you've got going on in the physical, and then another whole thing is going on in the emotional, to where pink, blue, and gold are supposed to billow out and fill the whole of the spherical aura of the emotional body. And it's supposed to charge the feelings with pure God desire, as well as pure God feeling, feelings of faith, feelings of generosity, feelings of compassion, whatever is called for in the given stanza of the decree. So the feelings have to be fully engaged. Your feelings are an indispensable mechanism for stepping down the light from the inner planes all of your four lower bodies are involved in the science of decrees. Quite frankly, the Ascended Masters and even you yourself don't need more power necessarily exerted strictly in the realm of nirvana, in your causal body realm. Everything there is perfect. Everything there goes on with precision. Similarly, in the Buddhic world of your Christ presence, everything there ebbs and flows, comes forth from the central sun and flows back to the central sun, and everything, thank you, is going on quite nicely in those realms. What is needed is for the transfer of that power to the four lower bodies of the earth through your four lower bodies. And so there has to be a stepping down into the memory body. With the memory body in your decree is where you are focusing your attunement. You are focusing your attunement on your mighty I Am presence. Your attention is there, and your attention is on the action of the light. Not only the call that you are making, but also the answer to the call delivered by your God presence in the form of the many light rays that go forth from your I Am presence and from the Ascended Masters. Ideally, you will be helped in that because there will be hints along the way in the body of the decree, of the action that is to be attended to by the memory body. In the mental body, you are forming recognizable, in many cases, three-dimensional forms of an action that is taking place. It could be the rays of liquid violet light coming down from the I Am presence, going beneath your feet, and then springing up as more like a set of candle flames, all iridescent with violet flame, springing up, moving in a purification through your outer flesh and your inner bodies. That is a thought form that your mind will create. Then your feelings have to ratify that thought form with the release of the sense of burden and the replacement of it with a sense of liberation and freedom as the debts to life are paid. Imagine if someone walked in your door with the Commerce Clearinghouse and a big, huge check and said, this is going to pay off every physical debt you have in your whole embodiment. Would you be happy a few minutes after that? Would you feel a sense of relief? That's what you should be feeling with your violet flame decrees, because something far more important is being done in that your mighty I Am presence in answer to your call is paying off those karmic debts to life. And you will feel that elan as a result of that percolation of the violet transmuting flame. And the more that you can engage through the heart, not through the solar plexus, in that feeling of joy and freedom, the better off you will be. One of the things we did not mention is that you choose to decree. There is always an action of free will. So your will is involved in this decreeing process, and you are giving that command, that fiat, that demand, that affirmation. You are crystallizing the will of your heart flame, and that is the role that your mighty I Am presence needs you to do. When you have done that, you open wide the floodgates for the outpouring, the limitless outpouring from your mighty I Am presence to start an action. And what you should have a feeling is that when that action is once started, it will never end as long as you are alive. The pressure will go forth night and day, waking and sleeping. The pressure of the light goes out, out, out. Perfection, perfection, perfection. Blue light, violet light, pink light, purple light, whatever it needs to be. The time will come when your attunement will be such that if anything hits the outer edge of your aura, your causal body springs into action, and the momentum of your decrees on either the blue lightning or the purity ray or whatever, that goes forth because the law of your being has been established. And it goes forth without even necessarily you always having to, in every moment, keep that momentum going. So that is how this world is intended to be redeemed. The keystone of it all is that the mighty I Am presence is the doer within you. The I Am presence alone is the source of the light rays that go forth in answer to your call with supreme authority. We don't have any more time left to describe the consciousness of those light rays, except to say that just as your I Am presence brooks no interference, knows no duality, and absolutely has that supreme confidence that when the light goes forth, the process is finished and done. That is the demeanor and the attitude of a firstborn son or daughter of God standing on their feet and giving those fiats and commands to life, and then knowing that the light continues to go forth night and day with the absolute unmitigated power of the presence to take dominion over the earth. That is what the world needs to grow up and to mature into these technologies of the Spirit. Thank you.